I forgave my wife for cheating in college, built a successful business, and gave her a lavish lifestyle. However, she suddenly left me for a wealthy man when my business struggled. I've been married to my wife Josephine for the past 23 years. Our story began back in college. I vividly remember the first time I met her. She was my buddy's sister, and we often found ourselves hanging out together. At first, there was no spark or attraction between us. We were just two people getting to know each other. But as time went on, we started to see each other in a different light, and gradually, we fell in love. One of the things that drew me to Josephine was her outgoing and extroverted nature. She had this magnetic personality that just captivated me, and those traits have remained some of the things I love most about her. By the time we both graduated from college, our relationship had become quite serious. It just felt natural to think about moving in together and eventually getting married. However, Josephine had other plans. She told me she wanted to take a year off to travel around the world. This wasn't entirely a surprise, as Josephine had always talked about visiting various places before settling down. She even had a travel vision board in her room growing up. I had already landed a really good job and didn't want to give it up to travel, so we discussed the situation. We decided that if this was something she truly wanted to do, she would have to go alone. While I leased a small but cozy apartment for myself, Josephine started preparing for her adventure. We weren't from wealthy backgrounds, so all her travel expenses would come from her savings, which she had diligently accumulated over the years, working part-time as a cashier in a restaurant. Despite having a student loan, just like me, she prioritized her dream to travel above all else and knew she'd have to make do with the money she had saved. The day she left was bittersweet. Seeing her off at the airport, Josephine promised to text me as soon as she landed at her first destination. Initially, everything seemed perfect. She texted me daily about the incredible places she was visiting and the delicious food she was trying. From her photos, she looked overjoyed and content. I was genuinely happy for her and would, in turn, share details about my day at the office and the work I was doing. I know it might sound boring to some, but I preferred my 9-to-5 job back then and couldn't see myself trading it for anything. Josephine listened to my stories and often told me how I was missing out on life by being stuck at the office, while she enjoyed beautiful cafes and tropical beaches. She would go on about how society was boring and that people needed to travel more and relax. However, as days turned into weeks, her enthusiasm started to wane. She began facing problems while traveling. Her wallet was stolen in a hostel, noisy roommates disrupted her sleep, and she found it hard to cope with the intense heat while traveling by bus in various Asian countries. She often asked me to lend her money for meals or to book tickets to her next destination. While she did try to find jobs here and there, it was difficult without a proper work visa. Josephine also befriended other travelers. Initially, they had a blast staying out all night and partying. She frequently sent me pictures of their adventures, but as time went on, she started mentioning that some people in the group were unnecessarily difficult, leading to frequent arguments. In those moments, I would tell Josephine that she could always book a flight back home and come live with me. I reminded her that she had been traveling for months and needed to rest. Although she never really took my suggestion, there was one time she called me in the middle of the night, crying. She missed home too much and was ready to come back, but she had no money for the flight. Without a second thought, I booked it for her. I was just so excited that my girlfriend, whom I hadn't seen for so long, was finally coming back to me. When I went to pick up Josephine from the airport, I was a bundle of nerves. Long-distance relationships are never easy, but I was glad we had navigated through those difficult days. However, I was shocked when she walked out with a huge mark on her face, looking like someone had punched her. She wore glasses to cover her eyes. Josephine ran up to hug me, but I couldn't hide my concern. When I gently asked what had happened, she brushed it off and started to kiss me. During the drive back to my place, I couldn't help but ask Josephine again about the mark on her face. The thought that someone might have harmed her was unsettling. She tried to dodge my questions, which only made me more worried. However, I decided to give her some space, hoping she would open up eventually. When we reached my apartment, Josephine was surprised to see how well kept it was. She expressed how much she missed sleeping in a comfortable bed and taking a hot shower. I let her freshen up while I took care of her laundry. She had a lot of dirty clothes that needed cleaning after months of travel. Once she was done, we sat down for dinner. I had prepared her favorite dish, chicken lasagna, and brought her favorite drink from the store, knowing how much she'd appreciate it. As she started eating, she smiled and thanked me for everything. I eagerly began telling her about all the plans I had made for us for the weekend. I was excited to show her around the city and take her to some amazing restaurants. Suddenly, I noticed Josephine had stopped eating. Concerned, I asked if everything was okay and saw tears rolling down her cheeks. I quickly got out of my seat and went over to her, asking what was wrong. That's when Josephine burst into tears and hugged me tightly. I held her, feeling terrified and worried about what might have happened. Eventually, she started to explain how she had seriously messed up. I remained silent as Josephine confessed that she never meant for it to happen, but it did. I looked at her, confused, and asked what she meant and if the mark on her face had anything to do with it. Josephine nodded, guilt written all over her face. She took a deep breath and began telling me about how she had grown close to a guy from her travel group, someone she spent every day with. My heart skipped a beat as she continued to explain that this guy was just like her. Josephine was always the definition of free-spirited fun. She had this infectious humor about her, the kind that made you laugh even on the worst days. It was one of the reasons I fell for her. However, what I didn't realize was that she had started to develop a bit of a crush on some other guy in our circle. She didn't even know how or when it happened, but when it hit her, she felt a wave of guilt wash over her. To make matters worse, this guy wasn't single, he had a girlfriend. Josephine knew better than to get involved and mess things up for them, so she stayed in her lane. That changed on one particularly wild night. She called me, a bit tipsy, from a night out with our friends. The whole group had gotten pretty drunk, and in the haze of it all, Josephine and this guy ended up alone in some alley. He leaned in and kissed her, and she didn't pull away. She looked down, avoiding my eyes, as she confessed to me later that she actually liked it and didn't stop him. Just at that moment, his girlfriend walked in on them, and chaos broke loose. She started yelling and screaming, and before Josephine could process what was happening, she got punched straight in the face. Feeling humiliated and confused, Josephine cut her trip short and came back to me. When she arrived, she looked like a mess, teary-eyed and visibly upset. She poured her heart out to me, saying she felt like she was losing her mind back then and had no clue what she was doing. She admitted that she felt incredibly guilty for having cheated on me. Listening to her, I felt like someone had punched me too, right in the chest. It was a mix of shock, hurt, and betrayal. The trust I had in her shattered like glass. When she first called me crying from her trip, I hadn't thought twice about booking a flight for her to come back. But now, hearing her confess to cheating with some random guy, it felt surreal, like an out-of-body experience. The gravity of her confession hit me like a ton of bricks, and I felt nauseous. I rushed to the washroom, overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. Josephine followed me, apologizing repeatedly, tears streaming down her face. She kept saying how sorry she was and how much she wished she could undo everything. I needed space, so I grabbed my coat and walked out, unable to stay in the same room as her. No matter how much I tried to think it through, I just couldn't figure out what to do. On one hand, my girlfriend had betrayed me, admitted to enjoying another guy's kiss. On the other hand, we had so much history together, and this was the first time something like this had happened. That night, when I finally came back home, she had fallen asleep on my bed, her face puffy from crying. I didn't wake her. Instead, I spent the entire night tossing and turning, struggling with what to do next. The morning after, I sat her down and laid out our options. We could either end things right then and there, or try to move forward together, but she'd have to put in serious effort to mend what she had broken. I expressed my deep disappointment, but also my willingness to work through it if she was committed. Josephine hugged me tightly, her tears soaking my shirt, and promised she'd never repeat such a mistake, but that wasn't all. I told her she needed to find a job and start paying me back for the money I had spent on her trip. Her eyes widened a bit at that, but I explained that I had covered her expenses out of goodwill, only for her to betray my trust. If we were to rebuild things, it was only fair that she repay every cent. Josephine agreed, although it was clear she wasn't entirely happy about it. The following months were challenging. Josephine lived with me while she hunted tirelessly for a job. Eventually, she landed a position as a personal assistant with a modest salary. She had hoped for something better, but I reminded her that without much corporate experience, she'd have to start small. I reassured her that with time and hard work, her salary would increase. Every time she got paid, Josephine made sure to give me a portion of what she owed, and also worked on repaying her education loan. We agreed to split the rent based on our salaries. She contributed her share, while I covered the larger portion of the expenses. I was fine with it, as long as I saw her making an effort. Slowly but surely, we started to repair our relationship. I began to trust her again and found myself falling back in love with her smile and laughter. We introduced each other to our families, and our bond grew stronger. Eventually, we started talking about taking the next step, marriage. While Josephine dreamed of a traditional wedding, I didn't want to blow thousands of dollars on a single day. Instead, I suggested we use the money for an extravagant honeymoon. Josephine loved the idea since we had never traveled internationally together. After a small, intimate ceremony with close friends and family, we set off on an adventurous honeymoon, traveling to several countries. Traveling with my wife was an absolute joy. We spent blissful days lounging on the beach, sipping mocktails, and exploring new places. Each morning felt like a slice of paradise. It was a much-needed break for me, as I rarely took time off work. We returned home feeling rejuvenated and ready to dive back into our daily routines. Our trip also gave me a revelation. I had always dreamt of starting my own business, but had been too afraid of failure. Traveling made me realize how important time and freedom were, and I finally felt ready to take the plunge. I discussed it with Josephine, and we both agreed it was the right time for me to take a risk, leave my job, and dive into entrepreneurship. Though she was a bit worried about losing my regular salary initially, I reassured her that once my business took off, it would bring greater financial rewards and more flexibility for us to travel. I even mentioned that if everything went well, she might not need to keep her job. Convinced, Josephine supported my decision, and I submitted my resignation letter, ready to embark on this new chapter of our lives. Over the years, I worked tirelessly to build my business. It wasn't an easy journey, but with persistence, I managed to make it successful. With the business thriving, I could fulfill my promise to Josephine and bought us a beautiful beach house. As planned, she quit her job since my income was more than enough to support us. During this time, we were blessed with a baby boy named Sam. He is the joy of our lives and has brought our family even closer together. Life has had its ups and downs, but we've managed to come out stronger, ready to face whatever comes our way. The best thing ever was when Sam was born. I decided to take a break from work to be with him, and luckily, my business ran smoothly thanks to my team. Sam and I have always been super close. My wife jokes we're like two peas in a pod. Watching him grow into a kind, curious boy has been the greatest joy of my life. When Sam turned 16, he started interning at my company every summer. I taught him everything because the plan was for him to take over someday, so I could retire. Everything was going great until last year, when I found out my wife was on antidepressants. She was defensive at first, but eventually admitted she'd been feeling bored and depressed in our marriage. I was shocked because we had regular date nights, vacations, and a luxurious lifestyle. She suggested we try an open relationship for more excitement. I was stunned and made it clear that wasn't an option for me. I said if she wanted that, we should get a divorce. She backtracked, saying it was just a suggestion. We continued our date nights, and she took her meds as advised by her therapist. I hoped she'd find happiness with time. Then, this year was tough. We lost customers due to COVID and had to close one of our branches, which was a big blow. When I told my wife and son, my wife was anxious about our finances and suggested selling the business. This led to a huge argument, and she called me a loser, saying she was done with our marriage. She packed some things and asked our son if he wanted to leave with her or stay with me. Sam, torn and crying, chose to stay with me, and we watched her leave. As my wife drove away, I couldn't help but think back on those days. It was such a confusing time for us. We just couldn't wrap our heads around why or how Josephine decided to leave us. My wife had been my best friend for as long as I could remember, so I was at a complete loss, wondering where I went wrong. My son Sam tried to reassure me, saying maybe it was just a temporary thing and she might come back. But as days went by, Josephine refused to pick up our calls, and we had zero communication with her. I couldn't just lie in bed feeling depressed, so I decided to get back to work and focus on saving my struggling business. Foolishly, I thought maybe fixing my business would also fix things between us. But yesterday, out of nowhere, my wife reached out after a month of silence. She asked if Sam and I could meet her for dinner because she had something to tell us. I had a gut feeling that our marriage was done for, which made it all the more painful to go. Still, I agreed. So, over dinner, she drops the bombshell. She explained how unhappy she'd been in our marriage, and that the past month away made her sure she wanted a divorce. Sam looked shocked, but I kind of saw it coming, so I just stayed quiet, trying to process everything. She went on to say she was moving out and taking her stuff. When I asked if she had found a new place, she smiled and said she didn't need one because she was moving in with her boyfriend. Yep, you read that right, her boyfriend. I was completely floored, feeling a mix of hurt and confusion. Josephine then went on about how she had met this older man over the past month, and they instantly clicked. She said she didn't want to delay living her life with him and being happy, so they decided to start living together. She even said that since my business was struggling, she didn't want any alimony, she just wanted a quick and peaceful divorce. She assured me she had thought this through and didn't want me to try to persuade her otherwise. Despite feeling utterly betrayed, I agreed to the divorce. Sam, on the other hand, looked furious and started yelling at her for abandoning us. My wife defended herself, saying she did her best but couldn't force herself to stay. She even offered Sam the option to live with her and her boyfriend, but he angrily refused, saying he wasn't going to abandon the family like she did. Proudly, I watched as he squeezed my hand and told her he'd choose me over her any day. After that, we didn't stick around to chat. We left pretty quickly. Since that day, I've noticed Sam has been unusually quiet, and I even caught him crying in the washroom once. It breaks my heart to see him go through this, and I haven't even had the chance to process my own feelings. I feel like screaming and crying over how my wife betrayed me. I can't believe she's asking for a peaceful divorce, as if I'm the one leaving her. Update 1. I'm glad I posted on Reddit because all your comments and suggestions helped me calm down and think clearly. You're right. I shouldn't engage with my wife if she doesn't want alimony and wants to leave without a fight. It's like taking the trash out itself. I've talked to Sam and convinced him to start going to therapy. Hopefully, he can heal from this sadness. Update 2. It's been 5 months since my last update. Last time I told you all about my wife leaving me and how my son and I were trying to cope, but today I have better news. My wife and I finalized our divorce. True to her word, she didn't take a penny from me as alimony. From the start, my lawyer had advised me that if she ever changed her mind and asked for anything, I should fight her tooth and nail since she was the one who walked out and cheated on me. Thankfully, it didn't come to that. If you think she did it out of the goodness of her heart, you're wrong. I found out from a mutual friend that her boyfriend is actually a married, older Saudi man who is super possessive. He insisted she not take anything from me because he doesn't want her living off another man's money. She's also trying to convince him to marry her, so she doesn't want to appear like a gold digger. Whatever the case, I'm just glad to be done with her. During our court meetings, she'd try to catch my eye or apologize, but I ignored her every time. Sam has cut her out of his life and wants nothing to do with her. He's still going to therapy and is learning to come to terms with our divorce. As for my business, it's improved a bit, and I'm confident I can get it back on track without Josephine dragging me down. I finally feel like I can give my 100% to the company and take it to new heights. Update 3. Today, I found out that my son had visited his mom. I didn't even know he wanted to see her, but what really surprised me wasn't their meeting. It was that he went to her place to meet her boyfriend and spill all the beans. Josephine called me in tears, clearly distressed, and angrily accused me of orchestrating the whole thing. Apparently, Sam had embarrassed her, and she thought I was trying to get revenge. I was totally bewildered because I had no clue what she was talking about. Later, when Sam came home, I asked him to explain. Turns out he wanted closure and to teach his mom a lesson. He reached out to her, claiming he wanted to meet, which excited her because she thought he'd forgiven her. She arranged for him to meet both her and her boyfriend. Seeing her partner made Sam even more upset, so during lunch, he told the boyfriend everything, how his mom walked out on us and cheated on me. Although I'm sure the boyfriend already knew these things, it must have been quite the scene to hear Sam describe our pain. Sam already knew his mom had cheated on me once before we got married, as we had discussed it during one of his therapy sessions. So, he told the boyfriend about that too, saying she'd likely cheat on him as well. I can only imagine how upset Josephine must be, especially since she's trying to secure her future with this wealthy man. When I asked Sam if he felt any relief after confronting his mom, he nodded and said he had always wanted to share these things with her, but never had the chance before. This is why I chose not to punish my son. Instead, I messaged Josephine to assure her that while I would ensure Sam didn't contact her again, I felt he hadn't done anything wrong. I made it clear that I didn't know he would do this, but that I was proud he spoke his truth and let out his frustration. If her partner's perception of her changed after learning the truth, it only highlighted how poorly she treated us in the past. She hasn't replied yet, but I don't think she has much ground to stand on. For now, I'm going to focus on making sure Sam is okay.